In a grim juvenile detention center, Tawnee found an unlikely protector in Victoria. Their intense romance led to a shocking tragedy. Tawnee was brutally stabbed 46 times. Tawnee was born on June 17, 1993, in Salt Lake City, Utah. She had a happy childhood and adolescence. Her parents, Dana Gunn and Casey Baird, separated when she was only 1 year old. However, for the sake of their children, they managed to maintain a good relationship. She grew up in a loving blended family with 2 sisters and a brother. When her mother remarried, the family expanded with 2 stepbrothers. Tawnee was described as a joyful and outgoing young girl. Her friends particularly appreciated her sense of humor and wit. She was very popular, a beautiful girl with long white hair and pretty blue eyes. She was part of the popular girls group at her high school. But Tawnee was also very ambitious. She dreamed of becoming a singer. She had a beautiful voice and dreamed of fame and making a living from her passion. According to her best friend, Tawnee was loving and caring, but above all, she was a loyal friend whom one could always count on, and it was precisely this loyalty that would change the course of her life. In June 2010, when she was 17 years old, she was in a car with her friends, smoking and having fun. Everything was going well until a police patrol caught them. It was just a routine check, but the officers found marijuana and drug paraphernalia in the car. In Utah, one of the most conservative states in the US, being in possession of controlled substances is considered a Class B offense. The punishment for an adult is imprisonment and a criminal record. On that day, Tawnee, who was the only minor in the group, decided to take full responsibility, declaring that the marijuana and equipment belonged to her. This spared her friends from prison, but it had consequences for her. She entered the child protection system and was taken away from her mother and placed in foster care with her aunt for a while. Her father, who had also struggled with drugs, did not take the news lightly. He realized that despite the warnings, Tawnee continued to smoke with her friends. Tawnee was therefore sent to a behavioral health treatment facility for 90 days. For Tawnee, this was a real shock. She, who had lived in a quiet suburb, was suddenly surrounded by real criminals. Some were there for drug trafficking, others for violence and robbery, and some even were part of gangs. During the first few days, she couldn't help but cry. Her mother was very worried for her. She didn't know how her daughter would manage in such an environment. She was confronted by the other inmates, but also was targeted by some of them. However, everything changed when she met Victoria Mendoza, who was 17 years old and was there for antisocial behavior. Victoria was originally from Mexico. She hadn't had the chance to have a happy childhood and adolescence with her parents and siblings. They were extremely poor and lived crowded in a tiny apartment that had only 1 bedroom. Beyond the poverty they lived in, later her father committed suicide. This event was a true shock for Victoria, and from that moment on, her behavior only got worse. She began to skip school and often got into fights. She also made many stays in a home for minors. Therefore, she was accustomed to this environment, unlike Tawnee, and she knew how to command respect. The 2 young girls began to get to know each other, and it was their shared passion for singing that brought them together. With Victoria, Tawnee felt protected and wasn't alone. Eventually, Victoria was hit with the devastating news that her mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer. During this hard time, she found unwavering support and reliability in Tawnee, who proved to be a faithful friend. This marked the turning point in the relationship between the 2 young women, evolving into something more intimate. It was an unfamiliar journey for Tawnee, who had only been involved with boys until then. The inseparable young women found themselves falling in love. During one of her mother's visits, Tawnee introduced Victoria, seizing the opportunity to come out as gay and reveal that Victoria was her girlfriend. Her mother was somewhat shocked by the revelation, but ultimately relieved to see her daughter happy. If it was her daughter's choice, she had to respect it, especially since she was grateful to Victoria for looking after Tawnee. In August 2010, Tawnee was released from the center a month before Victoria. She was torn between the joy of being released and the sadness of separating from the person who now made her heart beat. The 2 young women made a promise. Tawnee would wait for Victoria's release to continue their relationship. On the day of her release, Victoria slipped a little note into Tawnee's hand, asking her to read it only when she left. Once in the car with her mother, she opened the note and was quite shocked by the message. It read, "Sleep with someone else but me and I might have to kill you. I mean it. All my love." She didn't take this threat seriously, although unfortunately, this was the first red flag. Tawnee left the center and moved in with her mother. She was very outgoing and was happy to reunite with her friends. She immediately told them about her new girlfriend, Victoria. Even though they were surprised by her newfound homosexuality, they were delighted to see her so happy and in love. Tawnee, on her part, couldn't wait for Victoria to be released so she could introduce her to her friends and continue living their love in the real world. And it was a month later that, accompanied by her father, Tawnee went to the center to pick up Victoria. Tawnee had told her father about her relationship with Victoria. As long as his daughter was happy, he accepted. But when he saw Victoria, he was somewhat surprised by her appearance, as she had all the traits of a bad boy. She was very masculine, had a lot of tattoos, and did not look like the friends his daughter usually hung out with. However, all of that was just appearances, and all that mattered was his daughter's happiness. Surprisingly, despite her mother's battle with breast cancer, Victoria chose to visit Tawnee's family first upon her release. Tawnee's family and friends warmly welcomed Victoria, with Tawnee's mother even extending an invitation for her to stay at their home for a few days, an offer she happily accepted. Reunited at last, the two young women were inseparable, spending most of their time together and enjoying the company of Tawnee's friends. A few days after her release, Tawnee traveled with Victoria to Ogden, a city about 50 kilometers from their town where Victoria lived. Unlike the tranquility of Holiday, Ogden had a higher crime rate due to the presence of gangs. During this visit, Victoria introduced her new girlfriend to her circle. Victoria's companions, unlike Tawnee's, were rather unsavory. She would always carry a knife for protection. Contrary to Tawnee's outgoing and open nature, Victoria was notably more reserved and introverted. Nevertheless, she seemed happy and in love with Tawnee. They regularly posted photos on social media in which they looked close and happy. But unfortunately, as is often the case, the reality was entirely different. Victoria was very possessive and jealous on a daily basis. She viewed men as a potential threat and was afraid that Tawnee would leave her to go back to a boy. As soon as a male friend spoke with Tawnee, it led to arguments. She also wanted to know which boys Tawnee had been with before her. She became increasingly controlling with her girlfriend. This was a very frequent cause of arguments. Whenever she spoke with a male friend or received a message from a man, it led to big arguments and fits of jealousy. On one occasion, she accused Tawnee of cheating and said that even if Tawnee had no ulterior motives, the man certainly did. They argued in private, but they also argued in front of Tawnee's friends. They had accepted Victoria with open arms from the start, but they also recognized her impulsiveness and knew not to provoke her too much. In June 2012, Victoria's mother died. In this painful ordeal, she could count on her girlfriend, but also on her family. The two girls had been in a relationship for 2 years by then, and Victoria was in some ways part of the family. They were very saddened for Victoria, who found herself without parents, money, or work. Tawnee's mother then offered Victoria to live with them for as long as it was necessary. She considered her as one of her daughters. She had found a new family, but all these gestures were not enough to make Victoria feel secure. The arguments and fits of jealousy continued between the two girls. One day, the young girls had a heated argument. In a retaliatory move, Victoria left the house to engage in a sexual relationship with one of Tawnee's lesbian friends. Deeply hurt by all of this, Tawnee made the decision to end her relationship with Victoria. Despite Victoria's numerous attempts to mend the relationship, Tawnee, too hurt, stood her ground. She felt that Victoria was toxic and decided to move forward. That's when Victoria decided to record an apology message to win back her girlfriend, posting it on YouTube. Here's a clip from the video.
Okay, so I'm really confused on where to start right now. I have a lot of things on my mind that I want to say, but I keep going blank because I know that I'm recording myself and I know that I'm doing, I know that I'm on video and stuff, but I'm going to just start from where I feel like I need to start and end where I need to end. First I want to say is I'm sorry for hurting you and cheating on you with your best friend. And your best friend is a slut, and I don't like her. She's gross, and I can give a fuck less. Alright? So,
Despite the recognition by Tawnee's friends of the relationship's toxicity and their hopes that she wouldn't forgive Victoria, particularly due to the apology's nature, Tawnee was nevertheless touched by the gesture. Against her friends' wishes, she chose to forgive Victoria. After their reconciliation, as was always the case, they appeared happy, intimate, and in love on social media, or at least that's the image they tried to convey. Tawnee's parents believed their daughter was strong-willed and self-confident, and they didn't think she was under Victoria's influence. On her part, as is often the case in such situations, Victoria was not just possessive and jealous, but manipulative and dishonest. The relationship between the two girls continued to deteriorate. Victoria's jealousy and paranoia about men continued to grow. She was constantly in fear that her girlfriend would leave her and return to a man. Gradually, the relationship became more and more toxic, and it became increasingly difficult for them to keep up appearances. The arguments grew more frequent and became more violent. One day, Tawnee confided in her best friend, expressing her fear that Victoria might one day end up killing her. Dana, with whom Tawnee was living, was undoubtedly aware of the deteriorating relationship between the two women. One day, another violent argument broke between the couple. As the argument escalated, Victoria threw a punch that broke Tawnee's tooth and cut her lip, causing her to bleed heavily. With these visible injuries, the terrible reality of the situation could no longer be hidden from their loved ones. When Tawnee's mother saw her daughter's face in that condition, she was quite shocked and became very angry. On her part, Victoria seemed repentant. She cried and apologized. Alone with Tawnee, Dana quietly expressed her intention to press charges, but Tawnee begged her mother not to. If she pressed charges, given Victoria's record, she would end up behind bars again, but this time in prison since she was not a minor anymore. She begged her mother so much that she eventually decided not to. The hard part now was to convince Casey, Tawnee's father. Indeed, when he saw his daughter in such a state, he was immediately shocked and worried. When he asked what had happened, Victoria spoke up. She told a story of being attacked by a gang in Ogden, her hometown. She had tried to protect Tawnee, but unfortunately, they had both been hit and injured. Thus, she turned the situation around, positioning herself not as the perpetrator but the unfortunate. Neither Tawnee nor her friend contradicted Victoria that day, and that's the version Casey believed. Victoria and Tawnee had now been together for 4 years and the relationship was far from idyllic. Victoria was becoming more and more paranoid about Tawnee's male acquaintances as the relationship deteriorated. On the other hand, Dana couldn't forget or pretend that nothing had happened after what Victoria had done to her daughter. For her, Victoria had crossed the line, and she wished that her daughter would end this relationship. Despite everything, a relationship had formed over 4 years, which left Dana in a difficult position, unable to easily cut ties with Victoria. The young girl was without parents and a source of income, further complicating matters. Despite everything, she didn't have the heart to kick her out. Resigned, Dana did her best to calm things down between the two young women. She thought maybe they were together all the time, and this was harming their relationship. Therefore, she suggested to Victoria that she could help her in finding a job. The whole family supported this idea, with Tawnee's grandmother even offering to pay for laser sessions to remove Victoria's tattoos, as it was very hard for her to find a job with her appearance. Finally, Victoria found a job as a security guard. On October 17, 2014, Tawnee's family joyfully helped her prepare for her new job, which was set to start the next day. That day, Tawnee and Victoria decided to join some friends at a bar. They picked up Tawnee's best friend, Lacey, and the trio joined their group of friends. The evening was going rather well. Tawnee was surrounded by her friends and was in a good mood, but Victoria was not happy at all. Victoria felt as if her girlfriend was growing distant, seeming to lose interest in her. Witnessing Tawnee laughing and having fun with others, she sensed that Tawnee was slipping away from her and she was losing control. The evening went on, and when she saw her laughing with a man, her mood darkened even more. After spending 30 minutes in the bathroom, Victoria emerged, found Tawnee, and demanded they leave immediately as she had to go to work the next day. Under the pressure of avoiding a public spectacle, Tawnee reluctantly decided to leave despite having enjoyed her evening. As they were dropping off Lacey on their way, the tension in the car was visible, though Lacey chose not to intervene. Once Lacey had departed for home, the tension in the car escalated with Victoria at the wheel, leading to a heated argument between the couple. Victoria pulled over and their verbal fight turned physical. Allegedly, Tawnee slapped Victoria, who in return pulled her hair. This resulted in a violent altercation within the confined space of the car. In the heat of the moment, Victoria lost control. She reached for the knife she always carried and in a fit of rage, stabbed Tawnee 46 times in the forearms, face, head, neck, chest, and ears. Tawnee was no longer moving. Her body was full of blood. After a brief moment, Victoria started the car again and drove off. She ended up in the parking lot of a church she used to attend as a child. A friend of the couple received several calls from Tawnee's phone shortly after midnight. He usually did not answer after midnight, but as the calls were insistent, he finally answered. On the other end of the line, it wasn't Tawnee, but Victoria. She seemed completely distraught and he didn't understand what she was telling him. After speaking to him in an indescribable way, she hung up. Alerted and worried, Aaron decided to call her back to see what was happening, and he simultaneously recorded this call. Victoria told him she had just killed someone. She was scared. She had never been so scared in her life. At first, she did not mention Tawnee's name, at least not before he asked her where she was. She didn't seem sad for the person she had just taken the life of. She only talked about herself, her anxiety, and the fear she was feeling. At one point, she told him that Tawnee was still breathing. Aaron begged her to take Tawnee to the hospital, but eventually, she told him that it was over, she was dead, and was no longer breathing. She also said to him, "I think I'm going to go to jail for a long time and I want you to tell people not to hate me." Once again, her concern was more about public perception of her actions rather than what she did to Tawnee. She finally asked him not to call the police and hung up. After this call, Erin immediately contacted the police. But before she had called Erin, she had previously contacted her sister. After the call, her sister had gone to the parking lot of the church where she was located and saw the horrible tragedy. Victoria's sister also dialed 911 to report the murder. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the police received 2 calls indicating that a crime had been committed. On their instructions, they went to the parking lot. As they approached the car, they saw Victoria covered in blood. She seemed in shock, crying and shaking. They asked her if she had a weapon and she replied that her knife was inside the car. Inside, on the passenger seat, they discovered poor Tawnee, who had unfortunately succumbed to her terrible injuries. Victoria was arrested in the early morning. Rumors spread rapidly among the 2 girls' friends. When Lacey woke up, she had a bad feeling. She contacted Tawnee, who was not responding, so she decided to call Tawnee's house to see if she had returned home safely. Dana picked up the phone and told her that the 2 girls didn't return home. Alarmed, Lacey asked her to check their room to see if Tawnee was there. Dana, who was also starting to worry, went to check, but she was not there. She did not seem to have come back and neither of them answered the phone. That's when she told her that she had heard something serious had happened to Tawnee. So around 10 o'clock in the morning, when Dana saw a police car park in front of her house, her blood froze. She immediately understood that something serious had indeed happened. The police told her that her 21-year-old daughter had been brutally murdered by the young woman who they had welcomed into their home as a member of the family and whom they had supported and helped for everything. The autopsy revealed that none of the wounds were fatal. If Victoria had taken Tawnee to the hospital, she probably could have been saved. Tawnee's family was devastated. Their world had just collapsed. Victoria was incarcerated and charged with murder. In February 2015, at the preliminary hearing, she pleaded not guilty. She claimed that it was Tawnee who attacked her, that she had slapped her and pulled her hair, and she claimed that she had been afraid for her life. Victoria therefore pleaded self-defense. According to her lawyer, she was in the midst of an anxiety crisis at that time. She claimed that everyone was against her and even added that she had been threatened by Tawnee's family. On November 10, 2015, in the face of overwhelming evidence, her lawyer suggested that she change her plea and plead guilty, thus avoiding a trial and a potential death penalty. According to the prosecutor, what happened in the car was unclear. While she claimed to be driving, the knife wounds were located on the right side of Tawnee's body, which suggested that it was rather she who was driving. A bloodstain on the dashboard furthermore suggested that the unfortunate Tawnee had moved from the driver's seat to the passenger seat where she was found. To defend her, Victoria's sister denied everything on the stand. According to her, it was Tawnee who had the power in the couple because she had everything: the car, the housing, the phone, and her parents' money. Victoria, who had finally pleaded guilty at the end of the hearing, took the stand and declared, "I have no excuse for what I've done. That's the main reason why I've pleaded guilty. I really have nothing to say." And the monster here, Casey, Tawnee's father, stated that he did not wish for the death penalty. He wanted a life sentence, and he said, "I want to see her suffer, and I want her to suffer for a long time. That's why I don't want the death penalty. I want her to have time to think about what she did. A lot of time." The judge stated that in his opinion, the crime had not been premeditated. Thus, Victoria was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. She is currently incarcerated in the Utah State Prison. She can apply for parole after spending 16 years in prison. Tawnee's family, particularly her parents, have spoken out several times in the media. They regret not having acted, not having been able to see the signs. They have tried to send a message so that their sad story can help certain victims' families. Lastly, if you or anyone you know is in an abusive relationship or coercive control, please reach out to someone for help. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to follow for more crime stories.